In this video we continue to paint 4 Ents in the back of the van, whilst trying to find out if Britain still boasts a Tolkien-esque forest. Welcome to part 2 of Battle Cries, Ents in the Woods. Day 4 got off to a chilly start, but being a big brave boy I decided to head out early anyway for my big walk up a hill I'd spotted from the campsite the night before. Now I don't know how to get up that hill. I don't even know if you can get up that hill. I certainly don't know how to get back to the campsite from that hill. However, as a millennial London-based fair weather rambler, I have no doubt that if all else fails, Google will see me through. Turns out the answer to getting there at least was basically just to walk for hecking ages. Every time I glanced at that damn hill, it didn't seem any closer. However, I saw some cool sights, such as what looks like an ostrich or an emu or something behind a hedge, and eventually I spotted the road to the hill. So, I have finally arrived at the hill. I've been listening to Hamilton on the way, and it's taken me just over half a Hamilton to get here, so probably about an hour and 10 kind of thing. Now, there's 2 ways apparently that you can get up to the hill. There's a footpath in that direction, and there's a footpath in that direction. But you know, I figure if you want to get to the top of something, go to the top of something. Much straight up. How hard can that be? Oh. This hill is one of a series of 3. It is rumoured to be the site of the final battle of Caractacus, the British warlord who fought against the Roman invasions for the better part of a decade. One of the hills, Caer Caradoc, still hosts a Bronze Age fort, and the cave to which Caractacus is said to have fled after the battle. However, apparently even the majesty of this potentially epoch-defining moment in history was not enough to hold my fragile attention. There's some sheep here getting a bit leery. This is basically like being under warg attack. It's the same thing, really. Worse, maybe. Wargs are easy. The wargs were basically just protecting, political establishment, whereas sheep are defending their young. That's a more innate, more guttural instinct that's, I think, will drive them to more extreme acts of violence to achieve their ambitions. So, no regrets. No regrets. Some regrets. At the top of the hill, the view was pretty spectacular, and I saw some trees I could head to continue my search for the perfect forest. There was just one snag. This isn't the hill that I pointed out last night that I wanted to get to. That's the hill. Fuck it. The forest I found was underwhelming. Small and surrounded by fencing. This did not bless my bark. So, I head back to the van. I've only just got back, which means I've been walking for about 5.5 hours. That might not seem like a lot to a lot of people, but after a year of lockdown, it is. Still, this was not going to stop me. So, of course, I rewarded myself for the day's healthy choices with a large, greasy pizza, and then cracked on. The first layer of dry brushing is going to be a mix of dried bark and Gothor brown. I applied this as a heavy dry brush, and it was so satisfying going on. This is one of those models where dry brushing is just an absolute joy. Treebeard has got these sort of like mossy accumulations down here, and on the Games Workshop model you'll see that it's basically they just paint these green, which we'll do later, but I think it's kind of weird if it's just like moss, 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 no moss as soon as the texture ends. I think that the surrounding area should pick up a green hue to represent the fact that the moss is yes, it's thick in these areas, but it's infecting the surrounding area too. So basically what I'm going to do is create just a glaze with Athonian camo shade and just start glazing on, and when I dry brush in the future I'll also dry brush a little bit of green into those areas, and the crossover of the glazing and the dry brushing should blend it in quite nicely. Cool, so I think what you'll be able to see there is that we've developed this sort of gradual green hue going down towards the mossy lower parts of the legs. And so we'll dry brush onto that a little bit of green, and we'll dry brush the higher browns around it, and they'll mix together hopefully in quite an organic kind of way. So the next stage is more dry brushing, obviously, and this time it's just going to be pure Gothor brown. Right, whilst we're at it, let's dry brush a little bit of Deathworld Forest onto those green patches. Personally, I think that's looking really cool. After this, I did a heavy dry brush of Scrag Brown onto Quickbeam. God, dry brush central is the best. So you guys might realise that so far I've been completely avoiding the metal Ent, basically because I just don't want to deal with it, and it's a bit weird. It's just a bit weird, no offence. I had to do something with it, and so I started by glazing up Druchii Violet onto certain patches of the Ent, a bit like we did with the green on Treebeard. I did this because, I think it was just to see what happened, to be honest. Cool, whilst we're waiting for that to dry, we're going to go up to the next highlight on Treebeard, Baneblade Brown. I then used Carrick Stone to dry brush the metal Ent. I then used Doombull Brown to dry brush the Treebeard's beard. We're going with just a drop of Tuscarora fur. Alright, so now on Quickbeam, I've mixed 50-50 Flayed One Flesh and Deathclaw Brown. And I'm just using this to highlight features that we want to stand out. So eyebrows, for example. See, he's actually got a weirdly well-defined bum for a tree. After this, I was back to green stuffing, with my vaguely Ent-shaped lump of plastic disappointment slowly taking its grim shape. After the green stuff had gone on, I used Stirland Mud texture paint to create rough areas that I could paint up as thick moss. Finally for the evening, I started the long, arduous task of baiting the leaves. I began with Warflesh for Treebeard's leaves. It's time for bed, and that means one thing. Going through the rigmarole of trying to get the van back into a livable condition. After driving and walking and long painting sessions, as well as just the general exertion that comes with living out of a van, motivating yourself to do this can be a real mountain, which ironically keeps you painting for longer so that you don't have to face it anytime soon. Which further ironically makes you more tired, which makes it harder to face when you do get to it. Still, it gave me a little bit of time to reflect on the journey so far. Tomorrow I'd head off to Wales for my final campsite. And with any luck, I would at long last find my perfect forest. So, it's Friday morning. I really should be getting up, but I think there's two reasons why I resist getting up so much in the van. The first is that I know how much work goes into just putting the stuff away. The second reason is normally the need for a wee would get me out of bed. And I do need a wee, but I only have two options to facilitate a wee. The first is a bit of a walk off to a wooded area, and the second is the tub. And I must admit, the number of vehicles around has sort of undermined my enthusiasm for the tub. I mean, check out this one to my right. They have arrayed an alarming number of chairs, not pointed at each other, but all pointed directly at the van, as if it's some kind of like mad theatre performance. Before heading out, I took the opportunity to have one last stroll around this remarkably beautiful campsite, and found a discreet spot to urinate on it before having my morning coffee and setting off. Right, so I'm on my way to the third and final campsite. There are woods incoming, and the road is sort of snaking its way through them on both sides, so if I can find a place to stop, this might be a great spot to get the green stuffy ent sprayed up. Okay, I found a potential spot. I'm going to go investigate. Not the right place. This is a busy lay-by with not much tree density there, and it seems like it is prime pissing location. There was a literal stream of people. The search continues. This tub has done a pretty good job. The only downside is whenever I go around a corner, I can hear the contents sloshing from side to side. Really off-putting. I'm about halfway there, and this time, I think I've got it. Quiet lay-by, no one urinating. Golden. This looks good. Let's get it done. Smooth. As I meandered towards the Welsh border, and then finally into Wales itself, everything became a lot more green, a lot more tree-ish, a lot more quaint. I guess basically just a lot more Welsh. When I arrived at Monmouth Holidays, I realised just how splendid a choice this campsite was. I was also completely alone, at least to start with, and that isolation was very welcome. I certainly saved the best for last. This place is awesome, and I finally found my forests. I'm surrounded by them. It's incredible. I wasted no time in heading off into the woods for a walk. I have a friend who absolutely adores water in all of its sort of natural formations. The sea, streams, rivers, lakes. She calls it bodies of water, and whenever we travel anywhere, it is got to be to a body of water. I think in my haste to have my own favourite natural phenomenon, I told her that my equivalent would be hills, but actually I was wrong. It's forests. Forests are fantastic. I have not seen a single person since I got in here, and I hate that my criteria for a good time is that I must not be able to evidence that any other human being exists. It makes me feel very self-centered, but can't lie, I'm absolutely loving this. And I have hills, and I can hear the River Wye. Forests are just the best. I can see why Treebeard was so angry now. If Tom Bombadil were a middle-class 21st century Welshman, this is where he'd live. Ow. After lunch, I headed back to the campsite, and I started taking a weird interest in all the details on bark and twigs and sticks, looking at all the colours and the way they blended together. Hence this superfluous montage of close-ups of bits of wood. Ooh, look, a stick. Here's a tree. It's got leaves on it. Another tree, slightly greener than the last one. This one fills half the screen. Is it art? You decide. Anyway, I headed back to the van for a productive, smooth night's hobbying. a completely drained Nuln Oil. Do I have a spare? That's the question. Oh, no. My liquid talent. Ruined. Okay, I didn't bring a spare, so the only thing for it is to try and soak up as much as I can and get it back in the pot. Is it just me, or does the dinosaur doorstop have a genuine look of good-hearted concern on its face? I think it does. I think he's really worried that I might not be having a good time. It's done. I recovered this much Nuln Oil. So not an insignificant amount, although I think the amount that I've recovered is inflated by the amount of hair and dust and other bits of detritus that have been caught up in the box over the years. Okay, the first thing I'm doing with this miniature is using Rhinox hide to base the majority of the model. Right, I've never painted onto such fragile green stuff constructs before, so we'll see how this goes. I was painting the green areas with Death World Forest. I then used Agrax Earthshade to wash the brown areas. Then, predictably, it was Athonian Camo Shade to wash onto the green areas. I basically just painted it in two colours because, well, frankly, I couldn't stand to look at it anymore. I then dry brushed heavily with a mix of the base brown and Tuscarora fur. I then allowed myself just a moment of optimism about the project. Maybe the paint job can save this model after all. That's not looking likely from this angle. As I finished up painting for the evening, I reflected on the day's events. I'd finally found a massive, fantastic forest. A place where your random meanderings were not interfered with by walls or roads or bloody humans. Just a tangled wilderness, a mess of trees and roots. A place, surely, of which Treebeard would approve. I forgot to check for plugs again! Christ. Some of you might remember that this actually happened on my first trip. It's become a very unwelcome theme of my holidays. After that incident, a viewer very kindly contacted me and offered to make me a check for plugs sign for free. It's time I took him up on it. It is the morning of my last full day. Now, whilst it is probably the most glorious weather I've had so far, I do have a lot to do to get finished. And I've been promising myself a full Warhammer day anyway. And so a long stint confined to the van without another long walk is probably exactly what the doctor ordered. So in I go. Right, so as we get into the last day's painting, I'm going to start with my small dry brush by doing some highlighting. I'm going to use Ogren Camo on the vines and on the greenier bits, and Tuscarora fur on the woody bits. Certainly on the face, we want to bring that out as much as we can. You'll see, if you look closely on this little metally boy, that the leaves are tiny and everywhere. So that's going to be a real faff. So thanks very much for that, designers of this model 20 years ago. After painting those leaves in, I used Bile 10 green to wash the leaves on Quickbeam, trying to give him a more vibrant green to set him apart from the other Ents. A glorious moment has arrived. It's time to attach Treebeard's beardy head to his body. Being very careful not to ruin it. I've practiced dry fitting this a few times here, but there you go. That's it. Oh shit. There we go, that's it again. Next thing is, absolute nightmare. Start highlighting the leaves. And I'm going to start with my Lothern Forest, which is going on these sort of evergreeny type leaves. I do apologise very sincerely for the grotesque state of my nails, if they're ever in shot, by the way. By this point in the holiday, because of COVID restrictions, I haven't had a shower in about a week. I also apologise if it hadn't been a problem until now, but I've drawn your attention to them and now they're all you can look at. I dreaded painting the leaves because I once had a Sylvaneth army for Age of Sigmar, and this is a pain I remember all too well. Now I want to get these guys based this weekend as well, and in order to do that, I need to give the texture paint a lot of time to dry, so I'm actually going to do that before I move on with any more painting, and then I'll take a quick break while it dries long enough. So I'm going to be using Stone and Mud texture paint, but I'm also going to be using a pot of World Gaming Scenics, rocky, sandy, beach stuff. Let's prepare to utterly ruin the interior of my van. I'm just going to blob this on in random spots. That's a sexy blob. Takes one to know one. And then I'm going to use my metal tool because it's nice and easy to... Oh god, it's being attracted by the magnets underneath. I hadn't really thought about that. Cork boulders, of course. Whack a couple more on. After about half an hour spent watching dogs frolic out the window, the glue was dry enough to apply the texture paint, Stone and Mud. And with the early stages of the basing materials drying, it was time to get back to the painting. Right, it's time for eyes. Let's see if this holds up better than the last Artificio brush I used. New water is needed too. Do ignore the blood-curdling screams of what I promise are just children playing outside. I started by basing all the eyes with black. With the metal ends, I just put a blob around about where I expect an eye would probably be, for the sake of completeness more than anything. I then used Avalanche Sunset to paint just up to the edges of the eyes. I then used Rhinox Hide, painting small lines down to create the pupils, which, for the green stuff end, meant accidentally creating this bizarre portrait of all human fear made manifest. Oh, Christ. I then took a quick break to stare at the dog some more before cracking on with the rest of the painting, starting with the mushrooms, which I painted with Carrick Stone. Right, except for basing, they're basically done. I began the basing by painting the rocks with Dawnstone, and then I painted the gravel areas with the contrast base paint Wraithbone. Just one final accident. That's gravel and dirt and hair and God knows what going back into that tub. Oh my god. The table has been cleaned-ish. The pot has been closed-ish. And the models have been based-ish. And once they're dry, I'm going to do the incredibly satisfying bit and just slather them all in Agrex Earthshade on the rocks, on the mud, and on the dirt. And it's going to be fantastic. Then I'm going to go to bed. The slathering was every bit as satisfying as I'd hoped. And yes, I am concerned at how many times in this video I get inappropriately excited about the application of Agrex Earthshade to things. This ludicrous amount of wash would take an age to dry, and I took that as a convenient excuse to head to bed and rest my big, weary, ugly head. Last morning. Let's get up, pack away, get Ent stuff out, dry brush the bases, do the rocks, do some flocking, pack away again, go to my parents, pick up the cat, drive back to London. All after a few more minutes in bed. Basing materials are dry. Need them, need that. Yep, need that. Thank you. The only paint we need for the moment, Carrick Stone. A heavy dry brush of Carrick Stone brought the different textures together and brought them out with a nice simple highlight. I then used Dawnstone and then Administratum Grey and then Ulthwan Grey to highlight the rocks. I've always loved basing. When I was starting out, a friend would tell me, don't judge your paint job until you finish the base. It gives your model context and colour, and it frames it in a way that can change the way you feel about the entire miniature. That's always held true for me. Sticking in the right direction. Is that too much glue? I think that's too much glue. So now, I always think this is just like the most satisfying part of the entire process. It's so good. Tufts. Who doesn't love tufts? I know I should glue these down with a drop of PVA, but at the moment, just so I can basically test fit them, plop them down like this, and then I will plan to, but forget to glue them in properly later. The next, and excitingly last thing to do, was to paint the edges of the bases with Baneblade Brown. And this is actually the best shot I had of it available. You know, if you had to have a license to have a YouTube channel, there's no way they'd let me have one. That's my Ent Force done in a week of camping. Now, you've had to sit through a lot to get to this point, and I thank you for it. As a reward, here's nearly a minute's footage of me being reunited with my cat. Boo. I've missed you too. Yeah. Hey, Pickle. Yes, it was all very sweet and adorable for at least the first hour of driving. Please stop. We soon made it home, and between bouts of Boo battling for my affection and, well, frankly, me battling for hers, I got my Ents out for the customary showing off. I also painted Merry and Pippin to join them. If I was being generous with myself, I would say that the results of this project have been a mixed bag. I've got Green Stuffy Ent, who's both underwhelming and also quite creepy. Treebeard, who's just fuck yes, it's very hard to get him wrong, to be honest. And Quickbeam, who looks absolutely disgusting. I went for a summer blossom vibe on the leaves, it didn't work at all, and whilst the wood looks okay, those leaves will be repainted. And the Metal Ent, who, well, it's certainly a vaguely humanoid-shaped collection of twigs, so I'm gonna call that a success. I do sincerely hope you've enjoyed this road trip. There'll be another one in July and another one after that in August, both of which are going to be of a slightly different nature, but more on that soon. In the meantime, happy hobbying.
Get that cat out of the way!